we had a resident that was having difficulty with their motorcycle. And instead of working on it and around the property, they decided to bring it into their apartment. Motorcycle
what could go wrong?
Right. That motorcycle then, had, of course, some sort of issue, and a spark occurred, ignited a fire. And then it came out, not only was the motorcycle in the apartment, there was a go-kart in the apartment. It caught this other vehicle on fire and ultimately destroyed the entire apartment.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Defense Never Rests. I am joined again today by Joe. Welcome back, Joe.
Thanks for having me back, Megan. I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad I didn't scare you off last time and you were like, you know what, I'm going to do it again.
I even brought someone with me this time, and it was a very exciting discussion. We touched upon not only the Knicks and Succession, but also a very new, interesting product that I've never heard about. So I was very happy to be educated by Chuck on that.
Yeah. So for our listeners out there, we are joined today by Joe's old friend, Chuck. And Chuck is the regional sales director of Renters Legal Liability, or otherwise known as RLL. And they offer a really interesting product to property owners who own, like rental properties, and they have renters come in, and they offer a really interesting product that I think I've never heard of. And that's all I can say. I've never heard of something like this before. And I think it's a definite asset to both a property owner as well as their tenants, that they offer this. It's kind of like almost a bridge to coverage, and it gives their renters a little extra coverage if something were to go wrong inside or at the property that they're renting.
Right. And it's a device I had never heard of, but logistically, it just makes sense. And after hearing about it, I said, this should exist. And I think it's a way for property owners to maintain control over what they're doing. So I think it made a lot of sense, and I was educated.
Yeah. So, I don't think anyone benefits from hearing you and I talk about it. So with that, let's bring Chuck in and he can explain it better. So with that, let's bring him in. Good afternoon, Chuck. Welcome to The Defense Never Rests. How are you today?
I'm great, Megan. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I'm so happy that Joe is back. Joe joined me for his first podcast a few weeks ago. Didn't scare him off enough that he came back, and he brought a friend. He brought you.
Thanks
this time.
Again for having me. I'm so excited to be here again.
Yes, and I have to let our listeners know I hopped in on the recording, and you and Joe were sharing some, I guess, commiserating some stories about your basketball careers together. Amateur basketball hour.
Yes, well, we're first discussing the Knicks game last night, which obviously had a great outcome with them advancing to the second round, and then segued into our teams years ago that definitely didn't look as good as the Knicks last night, but we had a lot of fun with a couple other friends because Joe and I met through a mutual friend. So we played for a few years together, and it was a lot of fun.
Chuck was an integral component of our two amateur champion teams. We don't have the legs that we used to, but we still like to talk about it. And there was a big Knicks win last night, so probably the biggest win in 2 decades or something.
Oh,
shining moment for a franchise that's had its up and downs.
Well, I admittedly have not been paying attention. I think I heard that the Sixers are doing well. I don't know. Did they win their series? I'm not even sure.
They swept the Nets, so they're going against the Celtics in the next round. And the Sixers are very formidable. They have the MVP, probable MVP in Joel Embiid, and a former MVP in James Harden. So they're a team to look out for.
Yeah, well, you guys will have to keep me updated, because I sure as hell won't keep myself updated on it. We could turn this into a basketball podcast. I would be pretty silent. I would be like, although I always watched a lot of basketball, I just have fallen out of favor of paying attention. I blame the kids. But I think we did think ahead. I think we did buy Sixers shirts because for every other Philly sport this year, we were like buying the shirts at the last minute when everything was sold out. So I think we may have thought ahead on this one.
You saw a run coming.
Yeah, or my husband may have. I don't know. I didn't see anything. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. So Chuck, I'm so happy to have you. But let's talk a little bit about you and what you do and why you're here. So tell us a little bit of what you're doing right now.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. And our company RLL is a nationwide provider of real estate insurance products. And it's been really exciting to be part of our team for the last 10 years as we've continued to grow our nationwide presence. And I am one of the regional sales directors based in New York. I work from home when I'm not traveling, but our corporate office and where the company was founded is in Salt Lake City. And the majority of our team is still in Utah, but we have satellite offices across the country as well.
And how did you end up there? Like, what was your career path to where you are now?
It was my first job out of college, and when I was trying to figure out, what I wanted to do after I graduated, and I had some options. I always envisioned myself being part of a company that was building something and something that I could, be part of that growth and see that tangible expansion. And coincidentally enough, my father was a part of RLL for a short period of time as I was about to graduate. And, with that, vision of being part of something, to build upon and something or some company that was innovative and team oriented, he, in many discussions that we had, suggested that, I explore becoming part of the team. And, not only did RLL, have all of those components already in place, it's continued to grow. And it's amazing. It's been, 10 plus years now, but I'm just as excited then as I am now, as we, continue to evolve and adapt to, this chaotic insurance market, to say the very least.
So, and did you say your father worked there as well?
Yes, and he still does. And there was no pressure from him at all to join the company, but he thought, just with what my vision was to explore, being part of it. And we have a family component or dynamic, I should say, where two of the founding partners are brothers, and their friend, was also involved. And that family type of structure has always been part of our DNA, even though we've continued to grow and have 50 plus team members at this point.
My family has a business too, a little different. It's a restaurant, but there is something to be said about that family dynamic that can be problematic in some instances, but also I think does foster a certain type of culture. Like it makes things, I think, a little more like close knit, because not only is it a family run business, but like the people who work that you treat them like family too. At least that's been my experience. Likewise.
And as I always joke about when someone asks, what's it like working with your dad each and every day, and he's still part of the company. Our relationship is a lot simpler and uneventful in the work life than it is in the personal life, just because, we need to have that singular focus, and not that we have, a crazy, personal connection or relationship at all, but those dynamics, it's a lot more structured, and it's been great. And there are other family members that are also part of it, and it's nice to see that interaction, because we can turn on and off that dynamic when it needs to happen.
So it's not like Succession?
Definitely
That
not.
is not like
Not
Logan.
It's nowhere near that.
I had to throw it in there, like
We were all thinking it.
Actually, that didn't dawn on me, even though I am a fan of the show, but definitely not.
you're not the Roys over there.
No.
Have you been able to blend the personal and family dynamic and the business aspect of your relationship? How has that folded together for you?
It does resonate well, Joe, in some aspects, because a lot of the partners that we work with, whether it be property owners or third-party management companies, also have a family dynamic. So we can bond over that, and it definitely helps to some extent. But especially in the tri-state area, which we all may or may not know, there are a lot of family-oriented real estate businesses. So it does come up in conversation quite a bit, and we benefit from it, and also incorporate it in our storytelling, because it is an important component, since that human interaction, even though we're a nationwide company, becomes one of our foundational components, because when a partner calls or a prospect calls, they're able to speak with someone from our team, and they're not just a policy number or something along those lines.
So why don't we backtrack a little bit, though, because we're talking about your company, but we're not even letting anyone know what your company is and what you do. so let's talk a little bit about that, and then I have some follow-up questions about how it all started. But let us know, and our listeners know, what is your company all about?
Sure. RLL offers products to the real estate industry, specifically rental housing and associations, meaning condos, co-ops, and HOAs. And within that rental housing term, we cater to multifamily apartments, single-family rental homes, student housing, and senior living. And our primary offering, the waiver, is a property-centric model where it lists the property as the named insured, and it allows our partners to redirect exposure stemming from resident caused losses. Kitchen fires, overflowing bathtubs are incidences that are happening regularly from coast to coast. And instead of those losses and the headaches that come with them, becoming an out-of-pocket expense for property owners or having to be filed through their primary property policy, the waiver is a supplemental model that absorbs these losses, and it's filed directly to our team. And the benefit is that this model also provides coverage for residents in most cases, so it is catering to both parties, and it's introduced to residents as an amenity, typically when they move in or renew their lease, where it becomes part of that lease package, where those amenities may also include trash removal or common area maintenance.
So just a quick follow-up, is this an insurance supplement, replacement, or kind of like a combination of both for property owners?
It's a standalone product, Joe, where it's not replacing that primary property policy, but it's offering a way to redirect that exposure where that claim occurs. Say a resident falls asleep cooking dinner and causes a fire. Instead of that claim being filed through that primary policy, it's being filed through our website dashboard by the property. And then we're collaborating with the property and possibly the resident, and then reimbursing them in a way that's much quicker than the standard industry timeline.
And then do you then, since you're asking kind of as like a conduit, as kind of a conduit between the person staying in the property, the person leasing the property, and their renter's insurance, then do you collect from their insurance in between?
How it's introduced is through that renewal or new move-in phase,
Mm-hmm.
and usually our partners embed it as additional rent and then collect that amount each month. And then we are providing that invoice to the property owner. And through that dashboard, we're able to determine how many of their apartments are protected through the waiver and then billing them accordingly. Even though they're part of the billing process, which sometimes is an objection initially during the conversation, there is also an opportunity to create an additional revenue stream for these property owners because they're involved in the process. And typically our partners add an amount to the base cost and then retain that difference each month for every protected apartment.
So this is something that could be built into a lease or as an amenity.
Exactly. And to your point before, Megan, the waiver is not renter's insurance. It has similarities to it,
Right. Okay.
but there are a lot more benefits for both the property owner and the resident because it's underwritten and implemented on a per property basis. The property owner has the opportunity to have every occupied apartment protected by the waiver, where a standard renter's insurance policy cannot be done through one unique or specific provider. And from the resident standpoint, there's no underwriting that they have to undergo. If they're eligible to live there, they're eligible to fulfill their requirement through the waiver and receive their keys or renew their lease immediately because there are no protocol or paperwork that they would need to complete. So simplicity is really what we're offering, as well as that revenue opportunity and then the potential savings, because now these losses are no longer being filed through their primary property policy.
And it sounds like there's a lot of flexibility in this option that both for the property owner and the tenant. And since you have that, it's very straightforward that lends itself to this flexible model.
Exactly. It's absorbing these losses. It's improving the loss history, minimizing the deductible exposure through their primary policy, and the out-of-pocket exposure, because now, with the markets, and we can touch on this later on average, property owners are experiencing increases year to year between 20 and 40%. And not that this waiver is resolving all of these issues, but imagine that a certain amount of this exposure can be absorbed by this model and come at no cost to the property owner. And it's fully compliant from an insurance and fair housing standpoint.
You'd mentioned that your father works here and a number of the family members. So who started this? Like, was this a family business that started within the family, or like did someone like a group of people come together? Like, I'm just very curious how this got up and running.
It's a very wild story, and
I'm glad I asked.
and one that makes this world even smaller than it already feels. The founders were a collection of family members and friends in Salt Lake City. The primary founders were two brothers and their friend. The friend was an CPA by trade. The other brother was an attorney, and the other was in the business world. And they had relationships with property owners in and around Salt Lake City that were having these issues with regard to standard renters insurance policies and the administrative headaches that came with making sure that each resident's policy was remaining active throughout the duration of their lease. So they put their heads together collectively and found that there was the avenue to create an alternative, which became the waiver. By chance, my father was involved with another startup company that offered a security deposit alternative, and they were looking to expand their product offerings with a renter's insurance alternative. My dad and his team at the time went to Google and found that there was this new company established in Salt Lake City. my father called the office and spoke with one of the brothers of the primary founders. After speaking, they realized that they had a mutual relative.
Really?
Yes, but believe it or not. And they continued to discuss, offering, their products mutually. And then eventually my father joined RLL on a full-time basis. But that initial conversation, that, them playing the name game, really made, this a lot more than just saying, we're a family business, that with certain ties. It's a lot deeper, than it may seem, or the typical family business.
That's, I mean, I kind of love hearing that story though. I mean, that it kind of, it's like proof in the pudding that, like, networking works and you never know where it may lead you. But that is definitely a wild story. One of
or a couple of those, individuals that were part of, the, initial group, came, they had some insurance experience, and then, we're in the real estate world. So that blend of experience really helped, put together the original version of the waiver.
Now, when you were in college, in the back of your mind, did you anticipate that you were going to pursue, this as your career, or was it something that came up after you graduated? And my second part of that question too is, what did you major in college? Like, was it already in your mind that to kind of set yourself up to move into the business?
Like Joe, I was considering education, and both of my parents are teachers, or were teachers initially, and many family members as well. So my degree at Union College was actually a double major, history and classics. But I was keeping an open mind to what I mentioned before on possibly wanting to be part of something to build and offer a solution that could really benefit a specific market. Now, I know that is broad, but I think it was due to the liberal arts education at Union, that was also broad, that kept everything open at that point. But I had interned in the financial world in college, and had that experience, as well as the experience from family and friends in the education field. And as I was just talking it through, with my parents, my dad had just joined RLL and said, I know that you may or may not want to be working side by side with me, but I think you should seriously consider this, because everything that you're describing on what you would like at this point, and obviously that could change, is what we can offer, and also what I've already felt and seen through RLL. And those words really rang true.
I have to digress on one thing you mentioned, because you said like Joe, you had you both had a history in education. Joe, do you have a history in education?
I student taught. I have my teacher certificate. I don't lead with any conversations with this, but at some point I did teach middle school for
really
a semester. And that's why I decided not to have kids. I'm kidding.
Well, they're only in middle school for a few years. Well, I have it. My background is in math and science, and now I'm a lawyer. So I always love to hear everyone's background on how they got to where they are, because everyone has such just a varying degree of like where they started and where they are now, and like I love hearing it, because I think everyone needs to hear it, because we all bob and weave in our career paths. And it's something I always I say to like my niece and nephew who are like going into college now, and they're trying to decide their majors. I'm like, it's okay, you're probably gonna change your mind like 6 times, like like I mean, like a history and classics major, like I kind of like chuckled, because I was like, oh yeah, those are real good moneymaker, good ways to make money in majors. But we all just have these unique paths that we take to get, to where we are, and where we are now isn't necessarily where we're gonna end. So
Sure. And to reference one of the episodes I listened to, before being a guest myself, I forget the gentleman's name, but he mentioned that I never would have expected to establish myself in the insurance world, and I feel like a lot of individuals in the insurance space, can echo the same sentiments, myself included. But I will say this: RLL is a lot more than that, and I think any insurance role is a lot more than that, because we have the technology aspect to it, and then also the interaction of our partners and prospective partners in the various associations that we are active in, through the specific housing markets that we cater to. And it's a lot more comprehensive, of course, like any industry, but there is a lot that comes with it that isn't as boring as it may seem when someone asks me what I do for a living, because usually insurance isn't the most eye-opening or interesting topic to follow up with additional questions.
But people are so wrong about it. It's such a misconception. I mean, yes, if you hear the word insurance, you're like, oh. But there's like, as we all know, it's much more involved than just saying, oh, I'm in insurance. There's so many, there's intricacies and caveats to it. But I think the people need some education on, how exciting the world of insurance is and how it's everywhere.
And to kind of dovetail on that, I wanted to pick up on one of your points in your answer, Chuck. You mentioned the role of technology, and I envisioned the waiver being implemented with metrics, monitoring and taking the metrics of waiver in a way that traditional insurance policies potentially in claims monitoring do not occur. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And you've been at the company for a good period of time. How has that changed over the years?
The technology that was created even before I joined the team was and still is cutting edge, because it was created from scratch and was customized specific to the waiver. And its capabilities on a standalone basis are ridiculously impressive, because all of this information for a company, for example, with 1,000 apartments can become specific and easy to decipher on an individual apartment basis, where the data, once it's received by our partner, is organized appropriately, in color coordinated graphs, the reports, the claims process. Everything is so easy, and we created it based on the feedback and the needs of our partners. We had a decent idea to build that, or I should say our IT team had a decent idea on how to build it, but from there it's evolved, and it's continued to evolve, where we're actually in the process of launching another dashboard to enhance our capabilities and to make it even easier for our partners, in terms of these third-party renters insurance policies, because some of our partners still offer the waiver as a choice, but the majority of them use that blanket style approach that I mentioned before. So we always describe it, to backtrack for a moment, Joe, that our offering is as much a property management tool as this unique policy, and the waiver has what we describe, three major components: the unique coverage, because it's absorbing these losses, the economic benefits, that ancillary revenue opportunity that I mentioned before, the potential savings, and we can touch on that in a moment, and then this seamless administration through this dashboard. That's also available through a mobile app if they prefer that version.
And I think what it comes down to is control by both by the property owner and the tenant, but to a large degree, there's the flexibility by the property owner to implement this when, if you have a renter's policy, like you said, upon renewal, property owner doesn't know who's carrying it potentially. When they are able to embed something in a lease or as an amenity, and the property owner could control the situation. Is that right?
Exactly. It's been surprising, in my time here, how inconsistent residents are with obtaining or maintaining their renter's insurance policies. And that's where our partners and their preference shifts from offering the waiver as an option, to this quote unquote all-in approach, because there are so many variables that come with that renter's insurance policy. Will the resident provide it once they move in or renew their lease? Will they maintain it throughout the duration of their time living there? And if they do cancel it or fail to renew it, will that third-party company provide notice to the property at all or in a timely manner? And the majority of the time, the answers are all no. And it becomes extremely frustrating for our partners at that time, because they, to your point, lost a lot of that control. And now, with this blanket style approach, it simplifies their lives as well as residents, because most of the time, they're not maintaining or obtaining this policy because they have no need for it, or they may not understand why they need it.
I have a question about kind of how this works though logistically, and maybe I'm just like not totally understanding. So how I'm kind of hearing it is you have this product that you're basically selling to property owners, and the property owners are like apartment building, so a company that owns an apartment building, and they buy the waiver product from you, and then they offer it to their tenants. Is that kind of how the model works?
Exactly. So the relationship is formed between the property owner and RLL.
Okay.
Underwriting is done on a per property basis. The property owner is then introducing it to their residents through that lease, either when they move in or they renew that lease.
And is it couched as like a benefit to, if you come and rent an apartment in our building, we offer this benefit to you as almost like additional coverage for your apartment should anything go wrong. And to dovetail on that, can the tenants then opt out?
To the first part of your question, Megan, yes,
Okay.
that is the main goal, from our partner standpoint and ours, to add this in the simplest way possible, and then to also make it easier for the resident to receive their keys or renew their lease. Now, the waiver is primarily for the property owner. There is potential coverage for the resident's belongings, or if they need to stay somewhere temporarily while their home's being repaired. But to your second question, they can still obtain or maintain a third-party renter's insurance policy if they choose to do so. If they want additional coverage, additional perils, a separate endorsement, just to name a few examples. So it is a different model, and it's apples to oranges, when comparing the waiver to a renter's insurance policy. But the simplicity behind it, makes it so attractive, and why we're able to have a presence in all 50 states.
So it's like how I'm kind of hearing it. It's more of like touted as a benefit. Like, hey, look, we as a property owner, we've invested in this extra coverage for our tenants. It's to help you should anything go wrong, and almost allows the tenants, they have an option to still get renter's insurance, but it kind of relieves them of that need, unless they want to insure some of their personal belongings. But it almost gives them it's like an added benefit is how I am kind of hearing it.
Exactly. We promote it as an amenity that is similar to trash removal or common area maintenance. And we used those examples before, but it's introduced in that way, or it can be, because we offer these tools or resources to our partners to simplify the introduction. And they're templates, a flyer, and a video, so residents can understand what the waiver does provide them and what it may not, where they could obtain a policy from any third-party company. But the most important aspect from the resident standpoint is that the waiver is protecting them, up to that per occurrence limit, which is the property owner's choosing, where they're not financially responsible, and that can avoid a life-altering scenario. Back to that example of a resident falling asleep cooking dinner. If that apartment is unprotected, all of a sudden, that claim is then filed through the property owner's primary policy. That policy or that carrier then can subrogate against the resident or try to collect, for the damages that they were responsible for. And, even a modest sized claim, could be thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars, and puts them in a really difficult scenario. With the waiver, even if it can't offer the residents coverage for their belongings, or if they're displaced, it will prevent them from being held responsible for that type of accident.
At RL, do you have like a claims department? Like, you have claims handlers who are like adjusting these claims that you probably see come through?
We do, and our claims team is incredible. And what makes us unique is because our partners are collaborating with an RLL team member, and only an RLL team member, for all facets of our experience, especially claims. That claim is filed through our dashboard, and then our partner is communicating with a dedicated team member to expedite that process, where we may not even have to have our affiliated adjusters visit the property in order to provide reimbursements, because of the technology from our dashboard standpoint, and also that videos and photos from a tablet or a phone can be taken right when the incident happens, sent to us, and then we can provide a hard copy check or a direct deposit to our partner.
But you don't personally get involved in claims. Are you on the sales side of the business?
Yes, I'm one of the sales directors. My territory is the Northeast and some of the Midwest, which obviously is a big territory. Mm-hmm. But what is also unique about our company, half of our nationwide presence is through insurance companies, where we have partnerships with agencies, carriers, and wholesalers, because this is all that we do, Megan. Mm-hmm. They take our offering or offerings and then market it to their network, and we form that relationship that way. And once that partner of ours, through an agency, a carrier, or wholesaler, makes that introduction, we then take on all aspects of that experience, from the presentation, underwriting, marketing material, distribution, IT support, and of course, claims. And we have dedicated teams that handle all of those components that I mentioned before. But my responsibilities are just within business development.
Now, even though you're not involved in claims, I'm sure you hear of some of the claims. Are there any outrageous or like claims that you've heard throughout the years that stand out in your mind as I didn't ever think I was going to see this one?
Yes, and hopefully you have a lot of real estate companies that are avid listeners, and if they are, I'm sure they may be able to resonate with this particular story or stories that are similar. We had a resident that was having difficulty with their motorcycle. And instead of working on it in and around the property, they decided to bring it into their apartment. Motorcycle
What could go wrong?
Right. That motorcycle then, had, of course, some sort of issue with the motor or something along those lines, and a spark occurred, ignited a fire, and then it came out, not only was the motorcycle in the apartment, there was a go-kart in the apartment. So once this fire occurred from the motorcycle, it caught this other vehicle on fire and ultimately destroyed the entire apartment.
Yeah. Well,
that was a first, but when that type of question is asked, it comes to mind right away because it's hard to believe.
Well, I'm glad that no person was hurt in the process.
Yes, and that's an important aspect to mention. Thankfully, no one was injured within the apartment or adjacent apartments, but the photos were unbelievable. To see the type of wreckage occurred, and you could see the metal frames from both vehicles, or what was left of them.
I'm thinking about an accident in Super Mario Kart gone bad or something like that.
Yeah, that's a perfect example if everyone wants to visualize it.
And I'm sure, and Joe, you probably can't help your coverage analysis is probably, turning in your head.
Yeah, the wheels are turning here.
Now, and you said you're in all 50 states, but are there any areas that, you're seeing, I know you're not in claims, but we do talk quite a bit about claims on this podcast, but are there any jurisdictions that, you're seeing, more claims pop up than others around the 50 states?
During the winter months, we have always experienced a lot of water issues with frozen pipes that eventually burst, and that's due to residents shutting off their thermostat, lowering it below a certain temperature, or accidentally leaving a window open, if they were getting ready for work and opened the bathroom window and forgot to close it. And with some of these cold fronts, even that scenario could cause an issue. On an overall basis, a lot of the issues, based on these property increases that I mentioned before are due to acts of nature, and that obviously correlates with the frozen pipe scenario that I mentioned before, and with that comes ways that our partners are combating those issues with transitioning to that blanket style approach through the waiver, but also installing certain technologies to minimize that exposure, or being able to notify a team member to shut off that main water if there is a leak specifically within that apartment.
I want to shift a little bit over to your personal marketing approach, because we talk a lot about on this podcast too, relationships and relationship building, and obviously you are in the relationship and relationship building business because you are out here to get more business. So what is your approach to finding new potential clients without giving, I don't want no proprietary secrets or anything, but how do you target new potential clients? And then what approach do you take to explain your business model and, let's face it, sell this idea of this waiver and your services?
Sure. Well, with the chaotic markets right now, from an overall basis, we can't resolve all of those issues, but the ability to absorb these losses at no cost to the property owner, because it's being introduced to those residents as an amenity, is how we start those conversations, whether it's directly with real estate companies or through our insurance partners. And then, the savings that come, with that redirection and the ancillary revenue opportunity where, this, becomes where we're selling money in a lot of ways because of the unique capability of adding to the base cost and then retaining that difference and it being fully compliant from a fair housing or insurance standpoint. And the fact that this can be tracked seamlessly through this dashboard that can operate on a standalone basis, but also, and something we didn't touch on, integrate with many of the property management software providers that our partners are using. So that flow of data, when they're entering it themselves or it's being populated automatically, can then transfer to our system and be organized appropriately, makes this very hands-off for them. And really it comes down to filing a claim, when an incident occurs and promoting, that this is a lot more than, a standard requirement, because many carriers are asking real estate companies, do you require renter's insurance? And it's simply a checkbox item. The waiver is a lot more than that, and educating, all parties to that, really helps potentially exploring, these avenues for savings, because, these deductibles right now and the increases aren't probably going to level out anytime soon. But if, there are ways to, combat, these headaches, these can be explored in ways that make the waiver even more compelling than from years ago. Because Joe, you mentioned before, how have, the markets evolved, and it's gotten a lot more challenging because of the increases, but it allows us to tell a lot more of a story, and one that they can relate to, because, we are, now, at least to some extent, able to redirect this exposure.
Right. And if they're coming at as a instrument that they're unaware of, the fact that it's a no cost of entry or low cost of entry, I would bet that they would entertain that conversation or that dialogue in most instances, right?
Exactly. It comes at no cost to them in most cases. There's an ancillary revenue opportunity, and it's going to improve their loss history while being administered through this user-friendly platform. It makes a lot of sense, for them, and resonates because from a corporate standpoint, it's resolving, these costs and allowing them to adjust their budgets. But then from a community level, because, this is introduced, through those leasing offices or electronically, the fact that, this becomes an additional amenity, makes it attractive to retain residents or to entice prospective residents to moving in there, because they don't have to now obtain a policy and make sure that it's in compliance throughout the duration of their lease.
And have you found that the metrics that you use, are you able to present those to property owners in a compelling way, through either presenting it through PowerPoint or using other technology to do that?
Absolutely. And, given the current climate, RLL has given our sales team and I the tools, to adapt, to relying on Zoom or LinkedIn, to name two examples. We still believe, that there's no substitute for human interaction and being in the same room, as a partner or prospective partner. But, with the hybrid work model and events that we, usually attend, maybe not being back to even, years later after the pandemic, to those pre-pandemic attendance lists, it's still able to allow us to grow no matter what. Because prior to the pandemic, we, meaning the sales team, were on the road about half of the year. And it was great because we were able to maintain those relationships or build new ones.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we've all had to adapt to a differing approach to to business relationships and marketing and things. And I mean, I think we all like the being in the same room definitely has its benefits, but I think we've all kind of embraced to this other model that it makes it a little easier. Like this podcast, for example, got a heck of a lot easier to do when we were like, hey, let's just do it on Zoom, but versus having everyone come in our office, expanded our guest base and, and our reach. But, certainly there's a lot to be said about, talking to someone face to face and being, in the same room together. So how do you see, things changing or evolving, I should say, moving forward?
From our partners' perspective and conversations with prospective partners, making the waiver even simpler is something that they're asking for, because we are now possibly one of 10 amenities that their community teams are introducing to residents upon move-in or renewal. So taking more of that experience and doing it on their behalf, or being able to make it even more low maintenance, mentioning that dashboard before, that's something that we are gathering and adjusting accordingly. Also expanding the versatility of the waiver with different coverage models is something that we recently launched, where we're now trying to market to specific industries or sectors within rental housing that have a need, but wasn't necessarily applicable years ago, specifically affordable housing. So we're growing in that marketplace because they're sustaining losses just like a market rate or a conventional property would, as well as associations, where we're continuing to grow in that marketplace. And then lastly, we have a captive offering, which allows real estate companies in a way to self-insure, but then enhance the coverage and revenue capabilities compared to the standard model of the waiver, which we've been touching on. And those components or facets that we are already incorporating or soon will be is changing or adapting to the landscape, all based on the overall premium and deductible increases. All of this is reactionary, because their costs are skyrocketing. How can we combat them to some extent? Not that it can be removed altogether, but it will all, these features will all help them balance that financial responsibility now through their standard policies.
This sounds like a high growth business model, and also it sounds like a continuous revenue stream, because I don't see any particular reason why a property owner would want to stop using a waiver once they onboard that to their schematic. I mean, because it's in almost all situations, I assume it's going to be a net bottom line profit for their model, right?
Exactly. And we always envisioned making this as simple as possible, from a top-down approach. Right now, most of our relationships are introduced through the community offices or leasing offices, where we're now forming relationships or discussing them where this would be embedded through the carriers themselves. And that type of discussion is becoming more and more frequent, because the carriers are also struggling like the property owners. And if we can absorb the losses for the property owners, the carriers are just as interested.
Right.
You know, I might be reaching a little too far outside the box, but is there any or is there a place for this waiver in the commercial real estate area? Because I could see how, or at least in my mind, being not in your business, but I can see how, I just think of like these, larger commercial buildings that have several, commercial tenants in them. And I could see, at least it sounds like it could work in that kind of environment as well.
It's a question we get regularly. Right now, though, it's not a fit, but we continue to discuss, how it could, be structured, for, an office building or some sort of warehouse, to name two examples.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit different because obviously in the commercial space, you have businesses that are carrying probably they're going to be carrying a commercial business policy. So that probably bridges the gap of anything that the waiver would cover, that it's different from like someone who's renting, an apartment or a condo or whatever it may be. But just was curious if that was something that is considered.
Not right now, but possibly, because many of our partners, have mixed use properties, with, office or retail intertwined, with apartments above or, on the same floor, or standalone commercial properties. And they've asked, and we've explored them, but it wasn't, a natural transition at this point. But it is something that we continue to explore. So,
we're almost out of time, but I have a few, follow-up or closing questions though. But, what do you dislike the most about your job? And then we'll follow up with you like the best, but I want to hear what you like the least first.
To backtrack for a moment is something we previously touched on, the landscape right now on how we're communicating, and these resources that RLL has provided us with Zoom and LinkedIn subscriptions have been extremely helpful, to continue our growth. But not being able to, connect at certain events, or to call an office line, where those individuals were typically there 5 days a week, and now maybe 1 or 2 days, makes it challenging, because you don't obviously want to bother them with their if their cell phones are listed in their email signatures or things of that nature. So having that consistent flow, prior to COVID, that's really no longer relevant, has made it challenging. But with the other avenues, we have been able to adjust very easily, because the majority of our team was working remotely anyway, or had the ability to work remotely. So once the pandemic really occurred, we were able to adjust accordingly, and we had already been using Zoom. So lacking that human interaction would be the most difficult part, the last 3 years.
Yeah. But what would you tout as your favorite part about your job?
Our team,
other than that you work with your dad. That's pretty cool.
Our team, because even though we're scattered around the country, we are like-minded, and have this collaborative nature about ourselves, where everyone is accessible regardless of their role in the team, which makes it so easy to discuss certain ideas, and be able to address a certain need from a partner standpoint, where we continue to grow, and the technology allows us to grow and to stay nimble in terms of how many team members we have. But as we grow, and now that we're over 50 team members, nothing has changed when we were much smaller, and that makes it a really easy working experience, even if we're relying on Slack, Zoom, or picking up the phone. Where when we do get time to spend together, things feel very much the same, because that feel to it is as if we're all working in the same office.
Chuck, I do have one last question for you. By the time everyone hears this, it may or may not be relevant, but any predictions for the next Heat series? Who will win and how many games? Not to put you on your feet on fire here.
This may be the most difficult question so far. I like their chances against Miami, even though they've been extremely difficult year in and year out with their playoff experience. But I think the Knicks will beat them in 7 games.
Okay, I'm going Knicks in 5.
Well,
I would be more aggressive than that, and I'm not superstitious at all. But I definitely
this may
think the Knicks
jinx
are going to
them
win,
given their history, but I'm still going with it.
Yeah, the Knicks have been really impressive so far. Miami has, a tradition. Jimmy Butler has been incredible, but I think they can offset that and sneak into the conference finals, which is unbelievable, as I'm sure you would agree, Joe. If we were to think that this was a possibility at the beginning of the fall. Yeah.
I had season tickets last year, and I would say this. I would echo that. This is too bad I didn't renew them, because I would be very happy right now.
Oh man. Well, one thing before we let you go, Chuck, though. So I am curious about this, though, since this is the only job that you've had, since you graduated college. If you could go back and try something else or another career, is there any other career that you're like, oh, that would have been really cool to do, other than a professional basketball player? I'm going to take that one away from you.
That was never on the table whatsoever. I think my ceiling was when Joe and I were playing together in New Jersey, and having fun with a couple other buddies. But I was seriously considering coaching. I played college football at Union and in high school as well. And I spoke with the staff while I was at Union, and unfortunately I was hurt my junior and senior year, but was still active and attending practices and meetings. And really it was a way to experience it, as close to it being firsthand, shadowing the coaches. And my appreciation for what they did significantly increased. But on the other hand, it became apparent that this wasn't necessarily for me because of the demands, the lifestyle, and the fact that, especially on the college level, they may be living somewhere completely different on a year-to-year basis, depending on what goals they had, and that necessarily wasn't for me. I was able to help out after college with a couple of high schools in and around Bergen County, where I grew up, through Joe and my mutual friend, and a coach, through Ridge High School where I went, who's still a very good friend of mine. So that was, something that I was really considering, and not that I would ever suggest going through 3 knee surgeries to find out that a career wasn't necessarily for you, but that's how it happened. And I'm glad it did, because that appreciation was there, but, also, that it wasn't for me became quickly apparent.
Well, you can always coach kids sports now, right?
Well, after Joe's ringing endorsement of teaching in middle school, that's not really making it very enticing.
I will say I coach my daughter's teams, and it does take a whole lot of patience, because you have those kids out there that, I don't know, their parents just want them to get the experience, and they don't even know what sport they're playing or what team they're playing on. They don't pay attention to anything. But then you're like, well, they're 9, so can't be that hard on them, but it can be a little frustrating.
I can imagine.
Well, Chuck, I thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time. I thank you, Joe, for getting Chuck to come on. But why don't you take a second to just share where people can find you if they, if they could use, to get in touch and see if the waiver could be helpful to their property or their business. Just throw it out there.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. Our website is rllinsure.com. That's insure.com. We have plenty of material and videos that highlight our services. My email address is also listed on our website. If not, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I can send you both my contact information if you do have any direct inquiries. But our website is really easy to navigate, and even just submitting a simple request, we can connect, hopefully in person, but if need be, we can rely on Zoom.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Of course, to everyone listening out there, if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to the Defense Never Rests on Apple Podcasts. You can also find us at YouTube at TDNR Podcast. Thank you.